Let me ask you another question, because I obviously know you, and I know you have a child, and I know your husband's family can be pretty religious. So, how do you deal with that? I'll ask that in sort of two parts. How do you deal with, say, close friends or family that see you as an out sort of atheist? So, I don't think either one of us are going around holding up signs. It's really not our way. But when it comes up, we don't shy away from it, at least not today. But how do you handle those friends or family who give you grief over that? And then the second part of that question would be, how did you handle teaching your son this from whenever you started to even address it? Or did you teach him, or did you just tell me? Either way, you answer that how you decide to answer that.
Yeah, so in my family, I would say, so I told you my dad and my mom were both religious. They were were raised Catholic, and then they ended up landing somewhere in like a non-denominational Midwest version of Christianity.
Yeah.
And so my family, though, if you kind of zoom out to some of my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., grandparents, my family's pretty divided in terms of like, there's enough of us atheists in the family that my dad was religious, but his dad was an atheist. And so that kind of, sunk into enough of the descendants that, the skepticism, I guess, like the encouragement of like, okay, you're going to go to Catholic school because your mom says that you have to, but also, I won't pretend to have been there for those conversations, but I'm just kind of inferring that they picked up on it somewhere along the way. And so there's enough of us that I would say we can't be pushed around and we can't be bullied. And, nor do we want to do that to them either. We're not like high in numbers. We're pretty divided. So I think, at Thanksgiving, we will be respectful if some people want to pray and some people don't. There isn't like this pressure. It's like, hey, if you want to say grace, you can come on in, and then the rest of us kind of file in there, a few minutes later, and it's fine. But it has put a strain on, some relationships over the years. I know you brought up my in-laws, and some of the backstory about that. That's not my biggest issue with them, to be honest. It's like, I know, I know that they dislike that about me very strongly because I didn't, let's say baptize. We didn't baptize our son, my partner and I. We didn't, we don't participate in this, some of those like rite of passage ritual kind of things, growing up, christening, or I don't even
communion,
know
what kind of stuff.
Yeah, communion, exactly. Like we don't do all of that growing up, or during his growing up. He's almost 17 now. And but we've had moments where, at like, let's say my favorite story about him kind of like coming, like, we just never really taught him about religion until it came up organically. And then we would have, teaching moments, or we would have, and again, I'm not trying, because I'm not like here to fill his head with atheism, right? Like, I want to teach him how to think, not what to think. And so we just kind of like are laying out some questions and say like, this is true and this is true. What about this? What do you think about that? If A and B are true, like, what do you think about that? Or like, is A true? Is B true? I don't, like, let's talk about this. And so it got to the point where, a family member of mine, as a joke, got me a magnet to put on my refrigerator, and it said, "Keep Christ in Christmas." And it was really just meant to be kind of like a ha-ha funny, like, white elephant gift or whatever.
Right.
And at some point, my son was probably like 8 or 9 years old, and he read it, and he was like, And so he came and asked me, like, so just to give a little bit of a setting, I happened to be in the shower. So, he walked in the bathroom to ask me this question, but we could not see each other, right? Like the curtain is there in between us, and we can hear each other, but cannot see each other. And so he says to me, "Mom, who's Chris?" Chris.
That's funny.
I'm thinking like, where did he hear that, see that? And then I was like, oh, Christ. Oh, the magnet. And like I kind of like really quick was like, that's the only place in our house that he would have heard that. And so I said, have you heard of people that, have talked about Jesus before? And he was like, yeah, I've heard that. And I said, well, it's kind of like his last name, Christ, Jesus Christ. I said, it's not exactly that, but it was an age appropriate way for me to explain it to an 8-year-old, right? So Jesus Christ. I said, some people believe, and that's usually how I just start by saying that. I'm not trying to, again, say you should or shouldn't or whatever. I just say some people believe that, 2,000 years ago, he died and then he came back to life.
Yeah.
There was like this awkward silence at that time because we couldn't see each other, but it's almost like you could hear the wheels grinding.
Right.
But Mom, people can't come back to life after they die. I like whipped the curtain open, but just at my face. And I was like, right. And never forget that, son. And like the rest I don't have to teach him that's not true. Like all he needs to know is that people can't come back to life after they die. And I didn't teach him that. I didn't make that true. That's a well-known fact.
You have to suspend that in reality to accept the Jesus story, which is again okay if that's what they want to do. But you're the
most important story to their whole system, and without that, it falls apart.